The airport was busy the way big airports always are. People rushed from one place to another, each carrying their own worries, hopes, and plans. Among them walked a tall, calm man named Mr. Langston. He moved with an easy confidence. Not because he wanted to draw attention, but because that was simply the way he had learned to move through the world's quiet, steady and focused. He didn't wear anything flashy. His clothes were clean, simple, and well-fitted, giving the impression of someone who valued comfort over showing off. He carried only a small leather bag in one hand, and his phone stayed in his pocket. There was no assistant with him, no loud badges, no hint of who he really was. Most people who passed by would never guess that he was the owner of a company that worked closely with the same airline he was flying with that day. The flight he was taking wasn't long, but it was important for him to get some rest before landing. He had been traveling for 2 days straight, going from one meeting to another, dealing with partners, employees, and clients from different parts of the country. This flight was supposed to be a small moment of quiet. Nothing more, nothing less. When he reached the gate, he smiled politely at the staff member scanning the boarding passes. She greeted him, but didn't look at his ticket long enough to notice the letters VIP printed boldly on the top corner. She simply waved him through. He didn't mind. He had never been the type to demand attention. Inside the plane, the air felt cool and clean. The lights were soft, and music played in the background, barely noticeable unless someone tried to listen. Mr. Langston glanced down the aisle, looking for his seat. It was the first one in the VIP section, placed by the window. He stepped forward and sat down. Placing his bag under the seat in front of him, he leaned back and let out a small breath. The kind that slips out when a person finally feels a moment of relief. For the first time that day, it felt like he could relax. But the moment didn't last long. A flight attendant walked toward him. She looked tired in the way people look when they've dealt with too many rushed travelers in too little time. Still, there was something sharp in her eyes, a kind of impatience that showed before she said a single word. "Excuse me," she said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Mr. Langston lifted his boarding pass with a small smile. "Yes, this is my assigned seat." She glanced at the ticket, but didn't really look, only pretended to scan it. Her eyes barely touched the text before she spoke again. "I'm not sure this is correct. This seat is reserved for a VIP traveler. I think you might be in business or economy. Maybe there was a mix-up." He opened his mouth to explain, but before he could, another passenger stepped into the cabin. A man, white, dressed in a bright blue jacket and holding a large backpack that looked like it had been stuffed minutes before boarding. He walked straight into the VIP section as if he owned the place. Glancing around at the seats the same way someone scans a parking lot for the best spot, "This should be mine," the traveler said, pointing toward the seat where Mr. Langston sat. "My assistant always books me the front row. She knows I don't like being squeezed into the back." The flight attendant instantly turned toward him, her posture softening in a way it hadn't with Mr. Langston. She smiled, almost relieved. "Of course, sir. Let me sort this out right away." She turned back to Mr. Langston. "Sir, I'm going to need you to move. This gentleman is supposed to be seated here." Mr. Langston didn't react right away. Not because he was offended, but because he was confused. He checked his ticket again, though he knew what it said. "This is seat 1A, he said gently. "That's what's printed on my boarding pass." "I understand," the attendant replied, though her voice hinted that she didn't. "But I think there's been a mistake, and we need to keep things moving. Please gather your things and move to another seat. We can sort it out later." He felt several eyes watching. Not hostile, eyes just curious ones. Passengers had already begun to settle in, and any small disruption quickly drew their attention. Mr. Langston didn't like scenes. Never had. So he nodded slowly, picked up his bag, and stood. Before moving, he tried once more, but with calmness rather than frustration. "Could you please recheck the system? My ticket clearly says VIP seating." But the attendant waved him off politely, though dismissively. "Sir, please. We need to keep boarding moving." He stepped aside. The white traveler dropped into the seat without a word of thanks to anyone. He reclined instantly, humming to himself. As if nothing unusual had happened at all, The attendant's attention stayed on him for a moment longer before she walked away to greet more passengers. Mr. Langston made his way down the aisle. He didn't complain. He didn't argue. Being treated wrongly wasn't new to him, though he had long hoped that things would feel different as he grew older. Some days they did. Other days, well, days like this reminded him that the world still had a long way to go. He found an empty seat farther back. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it certainly wasn't what he had been assigned. He sat down quietly, hands resting on his lap. A couple seated across from him exchanged a look with each other. The woman leaned slightly toward him and whispered, "I saw your ticket when she held it up. It said VIP." He nodded with a faint smile. "It's all right. It's not," the man beside her said under his breath, shaking his head. "They didn't even check properly." But arguing wouldn't fix anything now. So he simply said, "Thank you," and let it go. He looked out the window, trying to push the moment out of his mind. But then something else happened. Something small but important. A young airport worker stepped onto the plane. He wore the same reflective vest that all ground crew members wore, and he looked around the cabin as if searching for someone. His eyes stopped the moment he saw Mr. Langston. "Sir," the worker said softly, smiling with surprise and respect, "I didn't expect to see you today." Some passengers turned their heads. The flight attendant from earlier also looked up, her face tightening for a second. As if preparing herself for something she didn't understand, the worker continued, "I didn't know you were flying today. If I had known, I would have made sure everything was ready for you at the gate." His voice carried a tone of genuine appreciation, the kind that comes naturally when someone recognizes the person who signs the checks for half the airport's cargo operations. The attendant blinked, confusion in her eyes. She stepped forward and asked, "You know him?" The worker nodded with a slightly raised brow. "Of course, everyone in our department knows him." The attendant's expression shifted, just a flicker, but enough to reveal a hint of shock. Now more passengers watched. They didn't know exactly what was going on, but they knew something wasn't normal. The worker offered Mr. Langston a respectful nod before stepping back off the plane. "Safe trip, sir." As he left, the cabin fell into a kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful, more like the air before a storm arrives. Something had shifted, something the attendant had not expected at all, and though Mr. Langston didn't say a word, didn't raise his voice, and didn't even look upset, everyone sensed that the small moment of unfairness at the front of the plane wasn't going to disappear as quietly as he had tried to make it. But for now, the plane simply continued boarding, unaware that the next few minutes would change everything. For the crew who had made the wrong assumptions about the wrong person, at the wrong time, the cabin settled into a quiet rhythm as more passengers found their seats, but the air still felt slightly tense, like something invisible had shifted, and no one knew exactly what it meant yet. Mr. Langston sat by the window in the middle rows, trying to relax, though his mind replayed the moment when he had been asked to move from the seat he was assigned. It wasn't the first time something like that had happened in his life, but each time it reminded him that some people looked at him and made decisions without even trying to understand who he was. He didn't like the feeling, but he also didn't want it to ruin the entire day. So he focused on the small things around him, the soft hum of people settling in, the faint chatter of families talking about their plans, the shuffle of bags being pushed under seats. He found comfort in these ordinary sounds. They made the moment feel less heavy. The couple sitting across from him kept glancing in his direction every few minutes, not in a rude or invasive way, but in a way that showed they still couldn't shake what they had witnessed. The older woman gave him a kind, apologetic smile once more, almost as if she wished she could undo what had happened. He returned a small smile, letting her know there was no need for her to carry the weight of someone else's mistake. At the front of the plane, the flight attendant, who had asked him to move, walked quickly from one side to the other, making sure overhead bins were closed and passengers were buckled. Her face had changed since the moment the young airport worker recognized him. There was something uneasy in her expression now, like she was trying to convince herself everything was still normal, but couldn't fully believe it. Another flight attendant, a quieter man with gentle eyes, approached her near the front galley. "Is everything all right?" he asked softly. She nodded too quickly. "Everything's fine. Just a busy flight." Her colleague didn't push further, though he could tell something wasn't right. Still, everyone had work to do, and the plane wasn't going to board itself. A moment later, a faint murmur started near the front rows, just subtle whispers from a few passengers wondering about the man in the reflective vest who had stepped onto the plane earlier. Most of them hadn't heard the words exchanged, but they had seen how respectfully the worker spoke and how startled the flight attendant had looked. People naturally filled in the blanks with their own guesses. Meanwhile, the traveler who had taken the VIP seat sat comfortably with his backpack tucked awkwardly under the seat in front of him. He kept adjusting the recline button, checking his watch, and tapping his foot impatiently, as though every small delay in boarding was a personal inconvenience. He didn't look back at Mr. Langston, not even once. Either he didn't care, or he didn't think he had done anything wrong. Maybe both. The last few passengers filed onto the aircraft families. Students, a pair of tired business travelers who looked like they hadn't slept in a day. The line eventually faded, and the jet bridge door was closed. A sense of routine returned, or at least it tried to. The captain's voice crackled over the speaker, calm and practiced. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're preparing for departure. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your devices are switched into airplane mode." People settled deeper into their seats. Bags shifted. Toddler voices quieted. A few people leaned back and closed their eyes, but before the plane could push away from the gate, something unexpected happened. The intercom beeped again, but it wasn't the captain this time. It was the attendant, her voice slightly tight, as though she was trying to hide something. "Everyone, please remain in your seats. We've been asked to pause boarding procedures for a moment." A ripple of murmurs moved through the cabin. The aircraft stayed still. No engines hummed to life. No one moved down the aisle then. The cabin door opened again. A tall man in a dark suit stepped inside. He didn't wear any airline uniform, but everyone could tell immediately that he wasn't just a random person walking in. Something about his presence commanded attention. The kind of presence that made people fall silent without being told. He was the airline's general manager for the region, though most passengers didn't know that. They only saw a serious-looking man walking in with a tablet in one hand and purpose in every step. The flight attendants noticed him instantly. The woman who had spoken to Mr. Langston earlier froze in place for a second, her eyes widening. She quickly smoothed her hair, adjusted her uniform, and tried to look composed. The general manager didn't even slow down. He walked straight into the cabin, scanning faces with a calm but firm expression, as though he already knew exactly who he was looking for. "Where is Mr. Langston?" he asked, his voice steady. Several passengers turned their heads. Some looked confused. Others recognized the name from the brief moment the airport worker had spoken it earlier. The flight attendant hesitated, then lifted a hand and pointed toward the middle rows. "He's seated back there," she said, her voice quiet. The general manager nodded once, then walked down the aisle, his steps long and unwavering. When he reached Mr. Langston, he stopped with a respectful incline of his head. "Sir," he said, lowering his voice, "I'm terribly sorry for what happened earlier. Could you please come back to your original seat?" There was no anger in his words, only genuine regret and respect. It was clear to everyone around that this man understood exactly who Mr. Langston was, but Mr. Langston didn't move. He looked up with calm eyes, his expression steady but kind. "I appreciate the gesture," he said softly, "but I'm fine here. I don't need the seat back." The general manager seemed taken aback for a moment, not offended, but a little surprised by the humility in the response. Most people in his position would have demanded the seat back instantly, but this man didn't seem interested in proving anything. "I still want to make this right," the general manager said. "You already have," Mr. Langston replied gently. "Please just address the issue with your team so this doesn't happen to someone else." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a certain weight, like someone speaking not out of pride but out of experience. The general manager nodded again, slowly this time, as though he understood not only the words, but everything hidden beneath them. Then he turned around. All eyes in the cabin shifted to the flight crew. The general manager's face, it changed. His expression was still calm, but it held a different kind of seriousness now, one that made the flight attendants stand straighter. As though they sensed the moment they had been hoping to avoid had finally arrived, he stepped toward the front of the plane. Stopping where the two main attendants stood, the woman's fingers twisted nervously around the edge of her pocket. The quiet attendant, with gentle eyes, tried to look unaffected, but his breathing had grown shallow. The general manager looked at both of them, then at the man in the VIP seat. "Sir," he said to the traveler, "may I see your boarding pass?" The traveler frowned, taken by surprise. "Why?" "I already told her what seat I'm supposed to have." "Your ticket, please," the manager repeated, firm but polite. The traveler sighed loudly, as though the request was an inconvenience. He reached into his jacket pocket and fished out the pass, handing it over with a look of annoyance. The general manager scanned it quickly. Row 4B. Business class. Not VIP, not even close. He turned the ticket around so the attendant could see it clearly. Her face paled. The traveler blinked. "There must be some mistake," he said quickly. "My assistant always gets me the front seat." "Your ticket clearly places you in row 4, the general manager said. "This seat was never yours." The traveler opened his mouth to argue, but the manager held up a hand not rudely but in a final, unquestionable way that made it clear the discussion was over. Then he turned to the staff again. His next words were quiet, but the entire cabin seemed to hear them. "You removed a VIP passenger from his assigned seat without verifying any information. This goes against airline protocol and the standards we expect from our crew." The woman swallowed hard. Her hands trembled. I thought that is the problem," the manager said gently but firmly. "You didn't check. You assumed?" The quiet flight attendant closed his eyes briefly, shoulders tensing. He hadn't been the one to make the decision, but he hadn't spoken up either. The general manager continued, "We rely on professionalism. We rely on fairness. We rely on respect. What happened here today violated all three." The plane was silent. Even the child who had been giggling earlier fell quiet. Sensing the seriousness of the moment, the general manager picked up the intercom phone, pressed a button, and spoke in a calm, measured voice. "Replacement crew to gate 22. Please, immediate." The words echoed through the cabin. The attendants' faces crumbled. They understood what was happening. Passengers watched, stunned, as two new attendants appeared at the door within minutes, uniforms crisp and expressions confused but ready to work. The general manager stepped aside, giving them space to board. Then he looked at the original crew and spoke softly, almost gently. "You are relieved of duty, effective immediately. Please gather your things." No raised voice. No harshness. But the message hit harder than if he had shouted. The woman nodded, tears beginning to gather in her eyes. Her colleague kept his head low, jaw tight. They didn't argue. They didn't try to defend themselves. They simply walked to the galley, took their personal items, and stepped quietly off the plane. Every passenger watched as they left. Most of them didn't cheer or whisper or gossip. Instead, they sat in a heavy silence, thinking about what had just taken place, how quickly a small action had grown into something enormous, how fast assumptions could turn into consequences, and how differently things might have gone if a little patience had been shown in the first place. Mr. Langston remained still in his seat, hands folded, eyes calm. He didn't appear pleased or triumphant, only reflective. He had not asked for any of this. He had not wanted it, but it had happened anyway. And the few who looked closely could tell this was only the beginning of a story none of them would forget. The plane stayed quiet for a long moment after the original crew stepped off. No one knew exactly what to say or how to react. What had started as a small misunderstanding had turned into something much larger right before their eyes. People had watched enough stories online to know that things like this could easily become messy, dramatic, or loud. But this situation had unfolded with a strange kind of calmness. That calmness made it even more powerful. Mr. Langston sat in his chair, watching the new attendants settle in. They moved with soft steps, trying not to disturb anyone. One of them, a woman with a gentle smile, walked down the aisle, checking that everything was in place. Her eyes paused briefly on him, not with judgment or curiosity, but with genuine kindness. She gave him a respectful nod. He returned it quietly. The plane finally began to push away from the gate. The hum of movement filled the cabin, and passengers leaned back as the aircraft rolled slowly across the ground. For a moment, everything felt normal again, or at least it tried to be. But the emotional weight of what had just happened lingered. Even the traveler who had taken the VIP seat looked uneasy now. He shifted around, tugging at his jacket, avoiding eye contact with anyone. He seemed to realize too late that he had played a part in something that made him look careless, if not selfish. His confidence from earlier faded into a kind of uncomfortable silence. Once the plane reached the runway and lifted into the air, the atmosphere softened a little. A few people opened books. Others plugged in headphones. The gentle sound of air rushing past the windows helped settle the energy inside the plane. After a while, one of the new attendants made her way down the aisle offering water. When she reached Mr. Langston, she held the small tray with both hands. "Sir, can I offer you anything?" she asked. He nodded. "Water is fine." "Thank you." She poured it with steady hands, careful not to spill a drop. "If you need anything at all, please let me know. We're here to make sure you're comfortable." Her tone wasn't overly sweet, nor was it formal. It simply carried respect, the kind of respect given to any passenger, whether rich or not. That alone made the moment feel different from earlier. "Thank you," he repeated, meeting her eyes for a brief second. She continued down the aisle, greeting each passenger with the same gentle politeness. It wasn't just professional behavior. It was warm, real, human. As the plane leveled out, the couple sitting across from Mr. Langston leaned slightly toward him again. The woman hesitated before speaking. "Sir, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but what happened earlier wasn't right," she said softly. "I'm glad someone stepped in." He smiled in a way that showed he understood her kindness, not just her words. "It's all right. Things happen. The important thing is how people respond afterward." The man beside her chuckled quietly. "Still, I've never seen anything like that on a plane." That general manager came in like someone's parent showing up at school. Mr. Langston couldn't help the small laugh that escaped him. He was doing his job, doing it well, the man added. Their brief conversation eased the tension a little. Other passengers, hearing bits of it, smiled or nodded silently. Still, one person was not smiling. The traveler in the VIP seat tapped his fingers on the armrest, staring straight ahead. He seemed uncomfortable, not because of the seat itself, but because he could feel the eyes on him, eyes that weren't judging harshly, but eyes that had witnessed the truth. Truth had a way of sticking to people more tightly than opinions. About 20 minutes later, a soft chime sounded, and the captain's voice came through again, offering weather updates and flight time. Once he finished, the plane settled into the calm period that usually came after takeoff. That was when something unexpected happened. A soft voice came from behind Mr. Langston. "Excuse me, sir? I hope I'm not bothering you." He turned. Behind him stood a young woman with a shy expression, holding a notebook in her hands. Her clothes were neat but simple. She wore a small pin on her jacket that suggested she was a student traveler. "No bother at all," said gently. She hesitated as though embarrassed. I saw what happened earlier. I don't know what your job is or anything like that, but the way you stayed calm through it. It was inspiring." He blinked, slightly surprised. Compliments from strangers always felt unexpected to him. "I wasn't trying to inspire," he said with a small laugh. "Just trying to keep the peace." "Well," she said shyly, "sometimes keeping the peace is the hardest thing." Some people would have yelled or refused to move. You handled it with dignity. "I think more people should act like that." Her words were simple, but they held sincerity. She wasn't trying to flatter him. She was speaking honestly. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. "I appreciate it." She nodded quickly and returned to her seat, clutching her notebook close. A few passengers who had overheard gave small nods of agreement. The plane settled into another calm stretch. Outside the windows, white clouds floated softly below them. Inside, the cabin lights dimmed slightly as the attendants prepared for the mid-flight service. But before they could begin, a light ping came from the speaker, the kind of sound that meant someone had requested attention. The quiet male attendant from the new crew walked calmly toward the VIP section. The traveler in the front row lifted his hand as the attendant approached. "Yes, sir," the attendant asked politely. The traveler shifted uncomfortably. "Listen, is there any chance I could switch seats? I know this one is supposed to be good, but it feels awkward now. People keep looking at me." The attendant blinked, unsure how to respond at first. "Sir, you are free to move to your assigned seat in row 4 if you prefer." No, the traveler said quickly. "I mean, maybe there's another seat up here. I just don't want anyone thinking I stole anything." The attendant's tone remained neutral. "This is the only seat available in this section, sir." The traveler sighed dramatically and ran a hand through his hair. Fine. I'll stay here." He slumped back in the seat, now visibly uncomfortable. The situation had turned what he thought would be a privileged moment into something completely different. A few rows back, Mr. Langston noticed the exchange, but didn't react. He didn't enjoy seeing anyone embarrassed. Life had enough ways of teaching people lessons without him adding to them. A little while later, the new attendant returned to him. "Sir," she said softly, "we've been told that lunch is included for all VIP passengers. If you prefer, I can bring your meal to your current seat or arrange something special." He shook his head politely. "Please serve it to the person in the seat." "I'm fine with a regular meal back here, are you sure?" she asked gently. "Yes," he said, offering a warm smile. "But thank you for asking." She didn't argue. She simply bowed her head slightly before continuing her work, but he could tell she appreciated his calmness. The hours passed slowly. People ate. Some slept. Others talked quietly with their families or travel companions. Then, around halfway through the flight, the general manager returned. No one expected to see him again. Usually managers came only before departure, not mid-flight. But he stepped onto the plane once more during a short maintenance check stop that required the cabin door to open briefly when he entered. He walked directly toward Mr. Langston again. "Sir," he said softly, "I wanted to personally check on you before we continue. I want to make sure you're comfortable and that everything is being handled properly." "You didn't have to come back," Mr. Langston replied politely. "I know," the manager said, "but I wanted to. What happened earlier should not have happened at all." His tone was firm, but not loud. He spoke like someone who cared about his work, not someone performing for an audience. "I'm fine," Mr. Langston reassured him. "People make mistakes. I'm not upset." The manager nodded, though he still looked troubled. "If you need anything at all, please tell one of the attendants. I've already made sure they understand the situation." "I appreciate it," Mr. Langston said again. As the manager stepped away, something shifted in the atmosphere. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Passengers felt a strange mixture of respect and curiosity. Who exactly was this quiet man in the middle row? Why was the general manager going out of his way to check on him? What kind of work did he do that carried this much weight? Some passengers whispered theories. Others simply watched with open interest. The traveler in the VIP seat swallowed hard when he saw the manager return. He sank a little lower in the seat. Once the manager stepped off the plane, the cabin door closed again, and the flight continued. The rest of the journey unfolded quietly, people eating, resting, thinking, waiting for landing. But for Mr. Langston, the silence gave him time to reflect. He didn't care about special treatment. He didn't want people to see him as someone more important than others. But he did care deeply about fairness. He had spent years building a company that valued respect above all else. And moments like this reminded him why that value mattered so much. People judged quickly. They assumed even faster. Not everyone meant harm. Harm could still be done without intention. As the plane began its descent and the familiar rumble of landing gear filled the air, A sense of expectation spread through the cabin. Everyone knew the flight would end soon. Everyone wondered what would happen once they touched the ground, especially because, even though he had stayed calm through all of it, the airline still had no idea that the quiet, polite man in the middle rows was the very person whose company signed several major contracts with them, and was scheduled to renew those contracts in just a few days. And that truth, still hidden from most of the plane, would shape everything that came next. The next few minutes aboard the plane felt strangely still. Almost like the air itself was pausing to take a breath. Passengers whispered quietly among themselves, but no one raised their voice. Everyone seemed to understand that something serious had just happened, even if they didn't know the full details. Moments like these always make people think twice, not about the drama, but about how fast things can change with just one decision, one mistake, or one act of disrespect. Mr. Langston remained seated near the front. Though this time he was no longer in the aisle seat the flight attendant had tried to remove him from. He had been asked very respectfully if he wanted to move back to the VIP seat he originally paid for. But after everything that had happened, he quietly shook his head. He didn't want the seat anymore. Not because of pride or anger, but because at this moment it felt unnecessary. What mattered to him now wasn't the comfort of sitting in a wide-cushioned chair. What mattered was understanding how things had gone so wrong in the first place. People stealing seats, mistakes with boarding, or arguments during travel were not new to him. He had flown more hours in his life than he could count. But what bothered him wasn't the seat hit, was the way he had been treated, the way his words had been dismissed, and the way someone's assumptions had guided their behavior from the moment they first looked at him as he sat there. Watching the cabin door open again to welcome in the new crew, his mind wandered back through past experiences. Too many times he had seen how snap judgments could lead to unnecessary conflict. Too many times he had seen how respect could disappear the moment someone assumed you were not important enough. He didn't like reliving those memories. But they came back anyway, as memories sometimes do. The newly arriving crew members stepped in with calm expressions, giving warm greetings that immediately softened the tension in the room. Passengers seemed relieved, though they didn't know exactly why. A calmer presence always changes the energy in a confined space, like an airplane cabin. The new team worked quickly, checking overhead bins, confirming seat numbers, and making sure everyone was comfortable. They moved with confidence, but not arrogance, and that alone shifted the mood. One of the new attendants, a woman with a gentle voice, approached Mr. Langston with genuine concern. "Sir, I just want to confirm if you need anything," she said softly. "We were informed you had an unpleasant experience before we boarded. If there's anything you want us to fix or clarify, please let me know." He looked up at her and offered a small, tired smile. "Thank you. I'm all right. I just want the flight to go smoothly for everyone." His tone was sincere, not cold. He wasn't the type who needed a public apology or theatrics. He appreciated sincerity more than showmanship. The attendant nodded respectfully and told him, "If you change your mind about anything, I'm just a few steps away." Passengers nearby watched the exchange closely. Some of them still didn't know who he was. Others had begun to piece things together after overhearing bits of conversations between staff. Still, no one made a scene. Most people simply felt the weight of the moment and stayed quiet. A man seated 2 rows back leaned toward the aisle, catching Mr. Langston's eye. "Sir," he said quietly, "just wanted to say, I'm sorry you had to go through that. It wasn't right." Mr. Langston nodded, appreciating the gesture. "Thank you," he replied in a calm voice. "But let's just focus on having a safe flight." The man nodded back and settled into his seat, but the sincerity of his words lingered in the air. As preparations continued, the cabin manager, an older woman with years of experience reflected in her steady movements, approached Mr. Langston with a respectful bow of the head. "I've been briefed on the situation," she said. "You should know this isn't how we operate. The company takes this seriously, and there will be proper reviews once we land." Mr. Langston didn't respond right away. He looked outside the window at the runway lights blinking in soft patterns. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I believe in accountability," he said. "But I also believe in fairness. I hope decisions are made based on truth, not assumptions. The cabin manager nodded. Of course, sir. After she walked away, passengers continued to whisper in low voices. Some wondered what had been said behind the scenes. Some wondered how deep the consequences would reach. Others simply felt relieved that someone had stepped in to restore order. But all of them sensed that the man sitting quietly near the front wasn't an ordinary traveler. A few minutes later, the pilot came out from the cockpit, something pilots rarely do unless the situation is truly important. He approached Mr. Langston with a respectful, almost formal tone. "Sir," he said softly, "I hope you're comfortable now. I want to personally reassure you that this flight will be handled with professionalism from this point onward. If you need anything at all, you may speak directly to me." Passengers stared, surprised by the unusually high level of attention being given to one man. But nothing about the pilot's behavior felt forced. It felt respectful, as if he knew exactly who he was speaking to. Mr. Langston simply thanked him, and the pilot returned to the cockpit. Once the door closed, the plane grew quieter again. But this time it was a peaceful, quiet, not the sharp, uneasy silence from earlier. Still, even though the mood had softened, the truth hung in the air like a dim shadow. The actions of a few had nearly disrupted the entire flight. A wrong assumption had turned into a wrong decision, and that wrong decision had nearly caused a bigger disturbance. The passengers understood one thing clearly now. The man sitting quietly in front had handled everything with remarkable patience. If he had reacted differently, if he had raised his voice, argued loudly, or caused a scene, the entire situation could have spiraled. But he didn't. His calmness had prevented a simple moment from growing into something chaotic. As the engines finally started humming, preparing for takeoff, the cabin lights dimmed slightly. People settled back into their seats, fastening belts and adjusting pillows. The new crew made their rounds one more time, checking that everyone was ready, but just before the plane taxied forward, the airline supervisor who had escorted the old crew off returned briefly to the cabin doorway. He took a quick look around the plane, as if checking something important. His eyes stopped on Mr. Langston, and he gave him a respectful nod. Then he left without a word. The door closed behind him. The flight attendant nearest the front made the safety announcement in a calm, steady tone. Passengers watched obediently, though many of them were still thinking about the earlier events. Mr. Langston rested his head back against the seat and closed his eyes, not out of exhaustion, but out of a quiet need to process what had happened. For a moment, he thought about how he could have reacted differently. He wondered if staying silent had been the right choice. But deep down, he knew why he stayed calm. Anger never solved anything, but clarity did. Far behind him, whispers continued. That man must be someone important. I heard he owns a company. I think the staff recognized him. Whatever happened, they handled it quickly. I've never seen a whole crew removed like that. Slowly, the plane began to move, rolling toward the runway in a steady rhythm. But even as the cabin lights dimmed and the aircraft prepared to lift into the night sky, everyone had the same unspoken thought. This story wasn't over yet. Whatever happened when they landed, it would change everything. Not because of a seat, not because of a misunderstanding, but because respect matters, no matter who someone thinks you are. When the plane finally landed, the cabin lights brightened slowly, letting passengers wake from short naps or shake off the quiet thoughts they had carried through the flight. The landing itself had been smooth, almost gentle, but the atmosphere inside the plane carried something heavier. Like everyone was waiting for the final chapter of a story they accidentally became part of, most passengers kept glancing toward the front, where Mr. Langston still sat calmly. Some wondered if he felt tired. Some wondered if he felt angry. Others wondered how a person could remain so composed after everything that had happened. But he didn't show any hint of frustration. His face stayed relaxed, his hands steady. It almost felt like he had been through far worse things in life, in this situation. This was nothing compared to what he had learned to handle. The new crew thanked everyone for flying, and reminded them to stay seated until the doors opened. The plane slowed to a complete stop, and a soft chime sounded, marking the end of the flight. But instead of passengers leaping up to grab their bags, they remained mostly still. They knew something else was coming. You could feel it in the air. A few moments later, the cabin door opened. A group of people in professional suits stepped inside. Their presence immediately changed the energy of the space. They weren't angry or loud. They were calm, serious, and observant. Some passengers recognized them as senior airline staff. Others simply sat quietly, waiting to see what would happen next. Leading the group was a tall man with a composed expression. He glanced around the cabin before walking forward. His eyes softened slightly when they landed on Mr. Langston, as though he had just found the person he was looking for. Passengers looked at one another, whispering that must be someone important. I think he's with the corporate office. They came for him. The senior staff member approached Mr. Langston with respect in every movement. There was no hesitation in his steps, no arrogance in his tone. "Sir," said quietly but clearly, "my team and I would like to speak with you privately once you're ready. We were informed of the situation that happened before takeoff. I want you to know the company takes this extremely seriously." Mr. Langston gave a small nod. "I appreciate that," the man continued, lowering his voice. "We also want to personally apologize for the treatment you received. This should not have happened, not to you, not to anyone." Passengers near the front pretended not to stare, but it was impossible for them not to listen. The tension from earlier had faded into curiosity and admiration. Mr. Langston replied gently, "Thank you for coming. I'm willing to talk. But please understand, I don't want anyone punished unfairly." "That is exactly why we're here," the senior staff member said. "To handle this based on truth." When the conversation paused, passengers began gathering their belongings. Some stopped by Mr. Langston on their way out, offering small gestures of support. One woman whispered, "You handled everything with such grace. I hope they treat you better from now on." Another passenger said softly, "You shouldn't have gone through that." Mr. Langston thanked each one with quiet sincerity, never acting as if he were above anyone. He stood once the aisle was clear and followed the senior staff out of the plane. The group led him through a private hallway inside the airport. The space was quiet, far removed from the busy crowd. Inside a conference room, a polished wooden table sat in the center. Water bottles were neatly arranged and chairs were lined up with precision. The atmosphere was formal, but not intimidating as they entered. A woman in a gray suit, possibly one of the highest-ranking officials, stood up. "Sir," she said respectfully, "I'm deeply sorry for your experience. Before we begin, I want to thank you for remaining calm. Had you reacted differently, the situation could have escalated in a way none of us would want. Your patience helped more than you realize." He nodded politely. "I wasn't trying to make things difficult. I just wanted to sit in the seat I purchased." "And you were absolutely right," she replied. She gestured for him to sit, and everyone took their places around the table. Screens on the wall displayed flight logs and internal communication notes that had been prepared for review. The woman in gray continued. "We have already suspended the crew involved, pending further investigation. However, we want to hear every detail from you directly. Your perspective matters." Mr. Langston leaned back slightly, gathering his thoughts before speaking. He wasn't the type to exaggerate or seek pity. He kept his voice steady, describing what had happened from the moment he boarded the plane. "I told the attendant it was my assigned seat," said softly, but she didn't want to listen. She didn't ask questions. She reacted based on what she assumed about me. His words were calm but clear. The weight of the truth didn't need to be delivered with anger. Truth delivered simply is often stronger. The senior staff listened carefully, occasionally taking notes. No one cut him off. No one tried to minimize what he experienced. When he finished, the room grew quiet for a moment. Then the woman in gray spoke again. "Sir, there is something you should know. Before coming here, we received a message from the corporate office. They were alerted to the incident because your company works closely with ours. When they recognized your name, they contacted us immediately." Mr. Langston sighed softly, not out of frustration, but because he knew this part was coming. "I didn't want special treatment," he said. "I just wanted fairness." "And you deserve it," she responded sincerely, the senior staff member added. "Your company has provided services to our airline for years. Your work has helped us grow. We value that partnership deeply. It is unacceptable for someone who contributes so much to be treated with such disrespect." Mr. Langston paused before replying. "I appreciate your sincerity. But this shouldn't be about who I am. This should be about how every traveler is treated." A quiet agreement filled the room. The woman in gray leaned forward. "You're right, and we intend to address that. Today we'll start changes in how our staff are trained, how they communicate, and how they handle conflict. This will not be ignored." For the first time since the incident happened, Mr. Langston felt a sense of relief. Not because of apologies or recognition, because real change might come from this. After the meeting ended, they walked with him toward a private exit. At the doorway, the woman in gray spoke once more. "Sir, the former crew members have been dismissed from duty effective immediately. Not simply because you're a CEO, but because their actions showed a lack of professionalism and fairness. We cannot allow that to continue." He took a slow breath. "I understand. I hope they learn from this. Everyone deserves a chance to grow, even when they make mistakes." The woman nodded. "That's a generous way to see it." As he stepped outside, the cool air brushed against his face. His car waited nearby, but he didn't get in right away. He took a moment to breathe, watching planes lift into the sky one after another. Life moved on, even when moments of conflict interrupted it. He thought about the passengers, the whispers, the faces that watched everything unfold. He thought about the crew members who lost their jobs. He thought about the new crew who stepped in so gracefully. And he thought about the people in the airline office, who seemed genuinely committed to making things right. He didn't hold anger. He didn't hold resentment. Instead, he held something softer, something quieter, a hope that this moment would become a lesson, a hope that people would learn to look beyond their assumptions, a hope that respect would become something instinctive, not something earned only after someone proved their worth. He finally opened the car door and sat inside. The driver asked politely, "Home, sir?" Nodded. "Yes, home." As the car pulled away, the airport grew smaller in the distance. The noise, the crowds, the confusion, all of it faded. And in the quiet ride home, he realized something. This story wasn't about power. It wasn't about titles. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about dignity, about the simple truth that every person, no matter who they are or what they look like, deserves to be treated with respect. And that truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. It leaves a mark. And sometimes, that mark is enough to change an entire system.